depending on where you're watching. Maybe it's the morning or at nighttime, but my name is Stanley. I'm a recruitment officer here at Carleton University. Just want to start by letting you know that our session is going to be recorded and posted on our website later on. So if you have any friends or family or colleagues that wanted to attend tonight but weren't able to, you can let them know that they'll be able to rewatch it. But that also means that if you do turn your camera on, or if you end up asking some questions using your audio, it will be part of the recording. So just wanted to let you know that. That being said, you can definitely, and we definitely want to hear from you. So there is a chat function available. So please use that to ask all of your questions that you have about studying law at Carleton. I'm sure you have lots if you were here tonight. And so please do that. What I want to do quickly before we get started with the fun part of tonight is to just give you a quick kind of reminder, refresher, and update as to where we're at in the admission cycle. So for if you are here tonight, most likely you've already submitted your application to Carleton's law program. Some of you may be holding offers of admission as well. If you are holding an offer of admission, just wanted to remind you that you can find your offer information on your Carleton 360 account. So when you log into that account, you'll be able to see everything that has to do with your offer, including your offer response date. Now that date is fairly common in Ontario, June 1st. That's the earliest date that any university in Ontario can require that you respond to their offer of admission. So it gives you a lot of time to do what you're doing tonight, which is really check in with the schools that you're interested in and get a good feel and sense for the community that's waiting to welcome you. And then if you are thinking about living in residence and you have a residence offer, you'll have until June 8th at 4:30 p.m. Eastern time to respond to that offer of residence. And in order to do that, you have to first accept your offer of admission. Then you'll be able to, again, accept your offer of residence and pay your $700 deposit. So just keep those two dates in mind. The last thing I'll mention with regard to your application is when you accept, or if you accept, let's say when, let's keep it positive. So when you accept your offer of admission, you'll be able to learn more about the registration process via email. So we'll email you around mid-May some really great information about how to access our registration tool, which is an online process, how to start building your timetable, what a time ticket is, and most importantly, the resources you'll have at your disposal to really make sure you start to pick the classes that really speak to you, including the classes that are offered through our law department. So definitely keep your eye out for that email. And then the very last thing I'm going to do is a shameless plug. So we started a podcast at Carleton this fall, winter. It's called the Talking Raven Podcast. I'm the host of the podcast, so I feel compelled to promote it. It's a really great podcast, not because I'm on it, but because of the guests that we have. They're so amazing. So if you haven't got a chance to yet, go onto your Spotify or your Apple Podcast, wherever you get your podcasts, and look up the Talking Raven. You will not regret it. So with that, I will pass it over to Zaina to get you officially started on tonight's main topic, which is, of course, law.
Thank you, Stanley. I didn't know you were doing that podcast. I'm gonna have to check it out at some point. Okay, welcome everyone. Thanks for joining us. My name is Ania Zbyszewska. I'm one of the faculty members and the undergrad supervisor in the Department of Law and Legal Studies. We really want to thank you for taking a few minutes out of your day to join us today and get to know our program a little bit more. Just a quick announcement before we get going to the main event. I know you guys probably at the top of your minds is a question about whether your classes are going to be in person or online next year. Carleton has announced that some classes will be in person and some online. And I just want to let you know that our law's first year classes, we have 2 of them. We're going to try and hold at least 1 or 2 of those in person on campus. The rest will be online. So if you don't feel comfortable coming into campus, you can still do that online. So those will be smaller classes, about 60 or less, but you will have the opportunity to register in that if you really do want to be coming on campus in the fall and winter. So I just wanted to let you know that. And of course, we're also planning to have some of our 2nd, 3rd, and 4th year classes in person as well. So if you guys would like more information about our program, we're going to save some time at the end today. If you do have any questions, feel free to just type them in the chat, or just certainly just turn your mics on and talk to us. But if you want to check out a little bit more about our program, please go to our Department of Law website. Just go to the Carleton University main page, go into the search box and just type in law and you'll get there. All our emails are available as well, and a ton of information about the program, what kind of courses you're going to be taking in the next few years will be there as well. Okay. All right, so now I would like to introduce you to one of my brilliant colleagues in the Department of Law, Professor Ania Zbyszewska. She's here to tell you a little bit about her research. Obviously, we've got a little bit of time, but I'll turn it over to her so you can get a bit of insight about what she's been working on.
Thank you very much, Zaina, for introducing me, and thank you all for being here to listen. At Carleton, I teach in areas of labor and employment law, and my current research looks at the role of law in managing the interface of labor and environment. And I forgot that I had a presentation for you that I would like to share, so let me just get to that, and then I will resume. Okay, one moment. Okay. So as I said, I research currently kind of the interface between labor and environment. And what I just want to share today with you in a few minutes is why I think researching this subject is quite interesting, also why it is important. And I will be drawing, first I'll talk a little bit generally about the context of my kind of research, and then I'll draw a little bit on a research project that I recently completed to flesh it out a little bit. So labor law scholars tend to center labor as the activity that requires and deserves legal protection because of its contribution to economy and society. And we think, as labor lawyers, a lot about ways in which this protection can be extended, and labor law's boundaries stretch to encompass more work and more people under its protective umbrella. And in the context of conversations around kind of the changing nature of work, these are pressing questions that labor lawyers and people who research work regulation more generally constantly engage with. But we also know that human labor carried out as part of kind of productive activity also wreaks quite a lot of havoc. The resource extractive, fossil fuel, industrial, big agricultural systems of production and economic development have, since the onset of Industrial Revolution, used natural resources on which they depend in a way that has escalated the pace of environmental degradation, biodiversity loss, climate change, and pushed our planet to a point at which several key boundaries that scientists suggest have to be respected in order to support life on Earth have been really approached and even exceeded. And our human impact is now recorded in Earth's crust, and we are in an era geological era that geologists call the Anthropocene. And some, however, refer to this era as the Capitalocene to more accurately attribute responsibility for this major transformation to a particular system of economic development, being capitalism. And human labor has, of course, been implicit in this process of change, while paradoxically being also exploited by the very same systems of production and economic development, that also ravage the bodies of people, appropriate social reproductive labor, and impact on entire communities in a manner that produces and reproduces neo-colonial relations and other social and economic inequalities at all scales. And the question of environmental and social sustainability of these economic development models and economic systems like capitalism is now subject to significant public debate, with a growing chorus of protest around the projected and already present impacts of climate change on people and whole communities. And while there is a concern that environmental action aimed at mitigating climate change will lead to job losses and put brakes on development, and unions and workers, for instance, are kind of engaging in that critique and concern about potential job losses, we also have to remember that workers and labor organizations actually have a long history of being environmental actors. And one way in which labor, trade unions and labor movements and workers have contributed to this conversation is through developing a concept of just transition, which they really have been developing and promoting since the 1980s. And just transition recognizes that a transition away from our current way of doing things is very much necessary, but it also focuses on the need to mitigate the job and livelihood impacts of climate change related industrial adaptations. And of course, what is important, and here I'm sharing with you some quotes from a research project that I carried out. I'll talk a little bit more about this project, but the quotes that I gathered from union officials and worker activists speak very much to the need for just transition. They talk about also what this process is, but there's also a recognition that climate change adaptation and mitigation efforts are not going to just affect those workers who are in the industries that require greening. So for instance, those workers in fossil fuel heavy industries, but ultimately that all workers in all industries and those also who engage in livelihood and subsistence activities in developing countries are going to be affected. In fact, all people are going to be affected in one way or another. But what does all of this have to do with law? And what does law have to do with it? Although policy now places considerable emphasis on just transition and the need for green and decent jobs, there has been much less attention actually given in policy to the role that law and specifically work regulation could and should play in this shift towards more sustainable future of work. And this gap is also mirrored in labor law scholarship, which has only very recently started to engage in a conversation with environmental law and also with this broader question of how labor regulation might be rethought to foster development of more ecologically sound and sustainable ways of organizing work. Why is this conversation so behind? Well, the answer might be quite obvious. Labor law and environmental law are distinct legal fields with unique material scopes and normative foundations. Not only are goals of the two disciplines of labor and environmental law quite different, but also sometimes they are said to conflict with one another. And I talked earlier, I insinuated earlier that workers and unions are sometimes concerned about the fact that climate change mitigation will impact on jobs. And so this idea that there is a trade-off between jobs and environmental protection is in a sense paradigmatic of this conflictual relationship that can be, that exists partly between these two areas. And I'm suggesting that law actually contributes to constitution of this conflictual relationship. And so, this brings up all kinds of questions. How do we mitigate and navigate these conflicts? If law is really a problem, can it also be part of a solution? Can legal frameworks be adapted in a way that helps to reconcile these conflicts? And these are some questions that really my research tries to unpack. A comparative research project that I recently completed, and some of the quotes I've shared earlier already stem from that project, looked at the extent to which unions and workers integrate environmental sustainability concerns in their negotiations and collective bargaining with management. And our research team has found that such actions are actually very much underway in workplaces across Europe. This is where our research took place, but I know from other research that such actions are very much also underway in Canadian context as well. But what we also found in our research is that law tended to come up over and over again as a way, as something that impedes more meaningful worker engagement with environmental issues and the green transformation of work and workplaces. In the UK, where my own study was located, unionists, business leaders, and managers, which tend to have all sorts of disagreements on all sorts of things, the people we interviewed from both sides of the labor relation tended to agree that it is absence of legal rights that explicitly recognize environmental issues as relevant for workplace collective bargaining and discussions and negotiations absence of such rights actually stands in a way of developing and delivering workplace policies and practices on the ground that would be more sustainable. And my colleagues who studied this in other European countries found very similar problems. So these findings really suggest that we really need to think and deeply about labor law and rethink labor law frameworks in order to help the process of green and just transition in the short term. But I would also argue that such rethinking is needed to change in a more long term how law constitutes and manages the relations between economy, society, and nature, and how labor plays a role also in constituting those relations. And my ongoing research really seeks to contribute to this process of rethinking. And that is all I wanted to share with you today. I'm happy to take questions if there are any.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Ania. I just want to open it up for any questions that you guys have for Ania or for us about the program. Stanley and I are both here if you have any questions about admissions or the application process. And certainly if you have any questions about Ania's work, please let us know. You can type it in the chat or you can just turn your mics on and feel free to talk to us.
Stop.
This is the part where we hope there's a brave soul out there that will ask the question I know they want to ask, but they don't want to be the first one. So please feel free to go and use that chat button and ask away. And do you teach any first year classes? I'm gonna miss that.
No, I don't teach first year classes. I teach in upper, third and fourth year classes and at the graduate level.
Cool. It's a very interesting kind of perspective to think about law and how it really has that impact on labor. Is, I mean, for students that are looking at this kind of program, they're thinking about obviously careers and jobs and their place in the labor force and how that can have a real impact on not only their own success, but also us as a community, as a society, and how we kind of transform the face of labor. So it's very interesting.
Certainly, my key selling point for the employment and labor law courses, it's really all, legal fields or areas are important. But I think this one is one that, we all interface with at one point or another, because, most of us are either work as employees or end up setting up businesses and working as and being employers. So it's really relevant field, I think.
For sure.
So it looks like you do have a question, Ania, a really good one. Have you seen any improvement in labor law so far from your research?
So to answer this question, there are in some jurisdictions. So as I mentioned, my research focused primarily on Europe and on the UK, but both in my research there, but also from what I know in research in the Canadian context, yes, there have been some improvements. So for instance, if we take serious, if you think of collective negotiations between unions and management as also part of labor law, because of course the collective agreement that unions and management negotiate are law. And there are many examples in Canada, for instance, and fewer in the European context of agreements that have been negotiated that integrate issues of environmental sustainability into them. So, for instance, workers, unions, and management have agreed to have specific bodies, consultative bodies, where different kinds of changes that take place at a workplace, which have environmental implications, will be discussed. So, and they have integrated clauses into collective agreements that speak to this issue as well. So if you consider collective agreements part of labor law, which they are, of course, then there is a change apace. But as I said in my presentation, it is slow, partly because where statutory frameworks, so legal kind of statutory frameworks exist within which collective bargaining ultimately takes place, those frameworks are really narrowly defining what are kind of negotiable issues for the purpose of collective bargaining. And unless, you know, workers and unions take charge and start to kind of push for integration of these kinds of issues into collective bargaining, the law doesn't really encourage them to do so. And so, yeah, it's kind of a mix. There is definitely change apace, but it is still quite slow.
Thanks, Ania. So it appears that we have a question about the program in general. So the question is that Ania mentioned she teaches a 4th year. Isn't this a 3-year program only? So we actually have 2 programs, or we have a few, but there's the option to do the 3-year program, so just the BA, and there's the option to do the BA honors, that's the 4-year degree. And your follow-up was if someone wanted to go to law school, would they need the 4 years at Carleton? So you do need, in general, a 4-year honors degree. It can be in law, it can be in some other discipline, but generally law schools are not really letting people in without the 4-year degree. So if you do have that plan to go to law school, then you want to anticipate doing the 4-year program. Ania, in your presentation, you mentioned that there are some positive changes happening in Canadian labor law legislation towards the environmental protections. Did you want to just expand upon that a little bit, just for their interest?
Sure, of course. So it's not, my research hasn't been on Canada, but I know colleagues who do this research in the Canadian context. There haven't been positive legislative changes so much in Canada. What there has been, though, is a lot more activity on the part of unions. There have been more collective agreements. So those are agreements that unions and managements, you know, negotiate with each other in workplaces that are unionized, and those agreements essentially set out the terms and conditions of work in a particular kind of unionized workplace. And there have been quite a few clauses integrated in collective agreements across Canada, across many Canadian workplaces, that pertain to this issue of environmental sustainability. Whether it's, you know, about the kinds of changes companies introduce to cut their carbon footprints or be more energy efficient. And of course, those changes end up having implications for workers, right? So they can impact your working hours, they can impact maybe your pay sometimes, maybe certain jobs get eliminated. And so unions in Canada have been doing quite a lot of work now for the last decade or so on negotiating more actively with management on those issues. So it's still very much in the context of collective bargaining rather than in legislation per se. But as I mentioned, my research in the UK indicated that there was a lot less of this kind of activity. Well, there was a lot of activity, but it wasn't making its way into written collective agreements because the legal framework that exists there kind of impedes that process a little bit.
Okay, thanks, Ania. So I'm just reading through the questions here. If someone were to do the 3-year program, what would be some of their possible career pathways after the 3-year program? So great question. Whether you do the 3-year degree or the 4-year degree, we are not strictly a pre-law program. We are a law and legal studies program. So we're really looking at how the law impacts people in their everyday lives and how people impact the law. And so we're going to look at what the law is, but we're also going to ask big questions about, big questions about democracy and what does that look like, and what are your rights and how do you maintain privacy. So we're looking at the law from a big picture discussion. So we're looking at it globally, we're looking at the politics behind it, some of the cultural questions behind it. So that sort of translates to your career paths. Some of our students, about maybe 10 to 15%, go to law school, but most of our students end up employed in many different industries. Some of our students go into many of the areas of the various levels of government. Many of our students end up in finance industries, publishing. It really depends, and you're really only limited by where you want to go. If you're interested in human rights, then you can sort of target your employment towards that area. If you're interested in more sort of business related courses or labor questions like Ania's been talking about today, then you can sort of target that area. So what you're taking away from the program are really transferable skills: how to do research, how to write effectively and efficiently, and how to really communicate your point of view to your employers. So it's really a transferable skill that you're going to use no matter where you end up. So again, it's really kind of open to where you want to go. And actually on our website is a list of, actually on the front part of our website, the Department of Law website, is a list of all the potential career areas where some of our students have ended up in the past, and you'll really see how diverse it is. So another question here: with that being said, are we able to switch the program of our choice even if we've already accepted an offer? That I'll pass over to Stanley.
Yeah, so you certainly can do that. I guess the easiest way to switch over is to send an email to our admissions office, and what I'll do is I'll add the email to the chat. The other thing to consider is that in your first year in law, you'll have some flexibility to take some courses outside of the program. So if you are thinking about some other areas of interest to you, what some students will do is they'll start off in the program they initially applied to and were admitted in. And then after that first year, they'll sit down with someone in their department to have a conversation about what their intentions are with the degree and what courses are really speaking to them. And there's always the opportunity to switch at that point. So really I would just kind of think about, like, what you're wanting to switch into if you're going to switch over, and seeing if there are, other strategic ways of handling it. But ultimately our admissions office is definitely available to assist you with that switch over if that's what you want to do.
Yeah, and I'll just add that if you are in our program, you're only required to take 2 first-year law courses, one in the fall and one in the winter, which really opens up potentially 4 other courses that you can take in the fall and the winter. And so you really have a chance to really look around the university and see what other programs interest you and to take their first-year courses. And we really encourage you to think about doing a minor. So if you've picked law as your major, think about doing a minor that allows you to really delve into another program, but focus in on law, but learn a little bit about another area as well. So you have a lot of options, and you certainly don't have to make decisions right now. You can come in, do the fall term and see what you like, and then switch around. So I'm not seeing any other questions, but I just wanted to highlight, because I'm getting a few questions. Absolutely, you're welcome. Just direct messages about law school. And I just want to reiterate that, yes, we are a law BA program, but it's much broader than that. So no one is telling you to go to law school after this. We certainly encourage you to explore all your options, whether it's grad school, law school, or the employment track. We've got students, as I said, that really go into careers in many different areas. It's really about what interests you, and we'll help you along the way figure out what interests you. You have a lot of support in our department. You haven't had a chance to meet our undergraduate administrator, Lindsay Dennison. She's here with the picture with the gavel and the books. But she's really the one that's really going to work with you to sort of figure out what courses are your best options and how to navigate the program and make sure that you graduate on time. So there's a lot of support for you here at Carleton in general, and also in the Department of Law. Okay. Sorry, so I just saw one more question before I wrap up. Does that mean that I can do this program and then go into the honors program, planning to go into law school? So you can go, so I'm guessing you're talking, Marie Danielle, about going into the BA 3-year program and then transferring into the 4-year. You can absolutely do that. You don't need to do that right away. If you're talking about, are you in another program like political science, for example, and switch into law, you can absolutely do that at any point as well. Okay. All right. So maybe I'll wrap it up there. I just want to thank Ania in particular for talking to us about her research. Really appreciate it. And Stanley, thank you as always for joining us and giving us a little bit more information about admissions and all the things that students need to know. Thanks everyone for joining us. We really appreciate it. And as I said, feel free to reach out to us. Just go on our Department of Law site and send us an email. Okay, thanks everyone. Have a great day.
Thanks.
Bye.
Bye.